New details in Lisa Marie Presley's cause of death. According to the late singer's autopsy report obtained by ET,
for years, the world believed everything about Elvis Presley's daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, had already been told. But before her death, she reportedly left behind a secret message that remained hidden from the public. Now, her family is finally revealing what she wanted people to know. What did Lisa Marie leave behind? Why is it only being revealed now? The words she left behind. She was many things to many people. To the world, Lisa Marie Presley was a name wrapped in legend, the only child of Elvis Presley, a woman who carried the weight of a dynasty on her shoulders from the moment she could walk. But to those who knew her up close, she was something far simpler and far more precious. She was warm, she was funny in a dry, unexpected way that caught people off guard. She was the kind of person who remembered small details about the people she loved, their favorite songs, the way they liked their coffee, the things that made them laugh when nothing else could. Beneath all the fame and all the pain that life had handed her, Lisa Marie Presley was deeply, achingly human. That humanity made her loss all the harder to bear. When she passed away in January 2023, the grief that swept through her family was not the kind that moves in clean, manageable waves. It was the kind that sits on your chest, the kind that makes ordinary sounds, a door closing, a phone ringing, the creak of a floorboard, feel suddenly unbearable. Her mother, Priscilla, had lost her daughter. Her own children had lost their mother. And in the days and weeks that followed, the house felt different, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with noise. People moved carefully in those early weeks. They spoke in low voices. They cried when they thought no one was watching, and sometimes when they knew someone was. The focus was entirely on mourning, on getting through each hour, each meal, each night. Nobody was thinking about belongings or paperwork, or the practical business of a life left behind. That could wait. Everything could wait. And so, certain things remained exactly where Lisa Marie had left them. Her personal space stayed largely untouched. Family members would pass by the door and slow their steps without meaning to, then keep walking. It wasn't avoidance born of carelessness. It was the opposite. The room held too much of her. Her scent, perhaps. The specific disorder of a life lived fully and privately. To walk in and begin sorting through things felt, to those who loved her, like an act they were not yet ready to perform, like closing a book before you were truly finished with it. Inside, as those closest to her well knew, were layers of a life carefully and sometimes chaotically documented. Lisa Marie had always been a writer at heart, not just a songwriter, though her music carried a rawness that surprised people who expected something polished and safe. She wrote in the older, quieter sense too, in journals, in longhand, in the kind of notes people write to themselves when they are trying to make sense of something. There were old boxes, the kind that accumulate in any life lived long enough, filled with keepsakes and letters and photographs and things whose significance only she fully understood. There were handwritten pages tucked into places that made sense only to her. All of it waited. When the family finally began the tender, difficult work of going through her belongings, they moved slowly and with great care. Every object was handled as though it might break, not because the things themselves were fragile, but because the act of touching them felt fragile. A hairbrush, a book with a turned-down page, small proof that she had been here, that she had been real, that she had been theirs. It was during this process that someone noticed something. Among her papers and personal documents, one item stood out. A notebook, or perhaps a folder, something that held written pages, had been placed in a way that seemed deliberate, not buried among other things, not shuffled into a pile, but set apart, separated from the ordinary accumulation of a life. The difference was subtle, but to the person who found it, it was immediately visible. Things placed with intention looked different from things simply left behind. This had been placed with intention. Nobody said anything for a moment. The room became very still. The document was passed between hands carefully, as though the weight of it had already been felt before anyone understood what it was. As they looked more closely, it became clear that this was not a casual piece of writing. This was something Lisa Marie had prepared, something she had, in some form or another, meant to leave. The realization landed quietly but heavily. This was a message. No one opened it immediately. How could they? The grief that had been sitting in everyone's chest suddenly sharpened into something more specific, more pointed. Whatever was written inside those pages had come from her, from the version of her that had sat alone and put words down in the particular silence that only comes when a person is being completely honest with themselves. Reading it meant hearing her again, and hearing her again meant feeling, all at once, exactly how much they had lost. They sat with it, they held it. Some wept before a single word had been read. Then, slowly, the decision was made. She had left this for them, whatever it contained, whatever she had needed to say. She had wanted them to know it. To turn away from it would be to turn away from her. And none of them were capable of doing that. Trembling hands prepared to reveal the words Lisa Marie had left behind. And nobody, not one person in that room, could have imagined how deeply those words were about to reach into each of them, or how long they would carry what they were about to hear. She spoke without saying a word. Lisa Marie Presley had always had a voice that was entirely her own. And here it was again, rising off the page as clearly as if she were standing in the room. Nobody spoke, nobody needed to. She had been, in life, a woman of enormous feeling and careful guard. Those who loved her understood that the two things existed together in her, that she felt everything deeply and revealed it selectively. She was generous with her warmth, but protective of her inner life. She laughed easily and grieved quietly. She was the kind of woman who would notice if you seemed tired and ask about it, who would remember something you mentioned months ago and bring it up again, who gave her love in specific, thoughtful ways rather than grand gestures. She was real in the way that very few people who live public lives manage to remain. And now, in this message, she was more real than she had ever been allowed to be outside of private walls. The words were personal, in a way that caught even her closest family off guard. Every sentence seemed to carry its own particular weight, like each one had been chosen after long thought, written and perhaps rewritten until it said exactly what she meant. There was no performance in it, no awareness of the audience. This had been written for them, only for them, and it read that way completely. She wrote about her life with a frankness that was both gentle and unflinching. Growing up as Elvis Presley's daughter had never been a simple thing to carry. The world had always had an opinion about what that meant, what she should be, how she should behave, what she was allowed to feel about the father she had lost at 9 years old. People projected onto her constantly, grief, legacy, expectation. Strangers felt entitled to her story. The press treated her private pain as public property. And through all of it, Lisa Marie had moved forward in the only way she knew how, by holding tightly to what was real and letting the noise exist at a distance. But the distance had cost her something. She wrote about that cost, honestly. There had been moments, she conveyed, when the weight of a name felt less like a gift and more like a wall between herself and the world. When people looked at her and saw only a reflection of someone else. When her own feelings, her own struggles, her own quiet victories went largely unwitnessed. Because the story everyone preferred was simpler than the truth. She had not been simply the daughter of a legend. She had been a full person, with a full interior life, and so much of that life had passed without anyone truly seeing it. As her family listened, several of them wept without making a sound. Then the tone of the message shifted, and she turned toward memory. She recalled specific moments, not the ones that had been photographed or written about or played out in front of cameras, but the small ones, the private ones. A particular afternoon that had stayed with her, a conversation that had shaped how she thought about love, the feeling of belonging that she had found in unexpected places and held on to fiercely. She wrote about her children with a tenderness that was almost too much to sit with. The way loving them had taught her things about herself she hadn't known how to access before they arrived. The family realized, as they listened, that many of these memories had never been shared, that Lisa Marie had been quietly carrying them for years, turning them over in private, finding meaning in them alone. The realization was both beautiful and heartbreaking. So much had lived inside her that she had never found the right moment to say. And then came something none of them had expected. Woven carefully into the later pages of the message was a request, not a legal matter, not instructions about possessions. Something far more tender than that. She was asking something of the people she loved, something that required not action, exactly, but a kind of commitment, a promise about how they would move forward, about what they would hold on to, and what they would allow themselves to release. The specifics were hers, intimate and particular to the relationships she had with each of them. The room absorbed it slowly. Someone pressed a hand over their mouth. Someone else stared at the floor. Nobody had expected this, and yet, hearing it, it made complete sense. This was why the message had been set apart. This was why she had written it the way she had, carefully, privately, with the full weight of her feelings behind every word. She had needed them to understand something before they could honor what she was asking. But even that understanding would not fully prepare them for what came next. Near the final pages, the tone changed again, not sharply, but noticeably. She moved towards something she had rarely spoken about directly in life, something that had lived in the quietest part of her. Her final thoughts on the page carried a quality that was different from everything that had come before, softer and somehow more final. The family leaned in without realizing they were doing it, just when they believed they understood the full purpose of the message, just when the shape of it had seemed to become clear. Lisa Marie's final paragraphs reached toward a truth that none of them had seen coming, and nothing in that room would ever feel quite the same again. What she had always been trying to say. She had never been easy to read, not because she was cold, but because she was careful. Lisa Marie Presley had spent the better part of her life learning, through hard experience, that openness came with a price. The world had taken her vulnerability and turned it into headlines. Her grief had been analyzed. Her choices had been criticized. Her silences had been filled in by strangers who had never once sat across from her and truly listened. And so she had become, over the years, a woman who communicated in layers, who said one thing on the surface while meaning something far deeper underneath. Those who loved her had learned to pay attention to the spaces between her words. Those who hadn't often missed her entirely. Now, sitting with her message in their hands, her family was finally paying the closest attention they had ever paid. The reading had ended, but the room had not moved on. People sat where they were, some staring at nothing in particular, some turning certain phrases over quietly in their minds. The words were still present in the air, not fading, but settling. And as they settled, something interesting began to happen. People started to talk, not loudly, not all at once, but in the careful, tentative way that people speak when they are trying to understand something that matters. Certain phrases from the message kept coming back into the conversation, specific word choices that seemed too deliberate to be accidental, sentences that held more than their surface meaning, that seemed to point towards something, to gesture at something larger than what they directly said. The more the family discussed them, the more the message began to open up, like a room with more doors than first appeared. She always said things that way, someone offered quietly. You had to listen past the first layer, and they had not always done that. That was the part that was beginning to hurt. Memory by memory, the family began revisiting the past. Conversations from years ago, some recent, some from long before, were returning now with new weight. A comment Lisa Marie had made at a family gathering that had seemed like a passing observation. A question she had asked more than once that nobody had thought to take seriously. A moment when she had gone quiet in the middle of something ordinary, and the quiet had been allowed to pass unremarked because life had continued forward and pulled everyone along with it. Those moments, ordinary as they had once seemed, were no longer ordinary. They were pieces. And the family was only now, in the grief-soaked quiet of this room, beginning to assemble them into the picture she had apparently been trying to show them for years. She had been communicating something long before she ever put it on paper. The message had not arrived without preparation. It had arrived as the final, clearest version of something she had been saying in different ways, across a long stretch of time. The realization moved through the room like something physical. What she had wanted them to understand had nothing to do with possessions. Nothing to do with money or property or the estate that bore her father's name. Those were not the things she had thought about when she sat alone and chose each word with such obvious care. What she had wanted, what the entire message, read properly, was asking for, was something quieter and more lasting than any of that. She had wanted them to hold on to each other, not as a family defined by its famous name, not as people bound together by obligation or shared history or the demands of a legacy that preceded all of them, but as people who genuinely knew and valued one another. She had watched over the years the way that grief and fame and the relentless pressure of public life could fray the threads that held people together. She had felt those threads pulling in her own life. And what she was asking, in the most honest words she had ever committed to paper, was that the people she loved refused to let them break. The room absorbed this slowly. For some, the tears came fresh, not the tears of initial shock or raw grief, but something different, deeper. The kind of crying that happens when you understand something you wish you had understood sooner. The kind that carries within it a particular regret, not the regret of wrongdoing, but of missed moments, of conversations that could have happened and didn't, of a woman who had been trying, in her careful, layered way, to be truly seen, and who had not always found the opening she needed. Others felt something closer to relief, as though a question that had been sitting unanswered for years had finally, gently been resolved. Not in the way they might have chosen, the resolution they would have chosen was for her still to be here, but in the way that was now possible. She had found a way to speak, and they had found a way to hear her. Others still sat in a complicated silence, wishing they had listened differently, wishing they had asked more questions, wishing they had told her, clearly and plainly, that they saw her, not the name, not the image, not the daughter of a legend, but her, exactly as she was. The message, which had begun as a discovery and become a mystery, and then a source of almost unbearable emotion, had arrived finally at something unexpected. It had become a source of healing. The words she had left behind were not a weight, they were a gift. She had known, perhaps, that this was how it would work, that the right words, given enough time and enough silence to be properly heard, could do what years of ordinary living sometimes cannot. The family sat with that understanding, still and full and changed. And yet one question remained, quiet but present, moving through the room like a current beneath still water. The message was theirs. She had written it for them. But Lisa Marie Presley had also, her whole life, belonged in some measure to the world that had grown up alongside her story. Would they keep her final words private, or would they share them? The truest version of her? She had always given more than she received. That was perhaps the simplest and most accurate thing anyone could say about Lisa Marie Presley. Not as a celebrity, not as a cultural figure, not as the daughter of the most famous entertainer the world had ever produced, but as a person. As a woman who moved through her days with a generosity that was rarely acknowledged because it existed mostly in private. She remembered birthdays without being reminded. She checked on people during their hard seasons without waiting to be asked. She told the truth when a comfortable lie would have served her better. And she did it gently, because she understood that honesty without kindness was just another form of cruelty. She had known cruelty. She had no interest in passing it along. She had also known, more than most people, what it felt like to be misread. For as long as she could remember, the world had been constructing a version of her that had very little to do with who she actually was. She was Elvis's daughter, and that was true, and she had loved her father with a depth that never left her, but she was also entirely herself. A woman with her own interior life, her own hard-won wisdom, her own particular way of seeing the world. The public version of her was always slightly off, always missing something. The real Lisa Marie existed in the spaces that cameras could not reach and headlines could not contain. And now, in the aftermath of her passing, her family sat with the truest version of her they had ever held in their hands. The debate began quietly. Nobody arrived at the question aggressively or with certainty. It surfaced the way difficult questions usually do, gradually, hesitantly, in the pauses between other conversations. The message had been read. The tears had come and, for the most part, had settled into something quieter. And now the people she had left behind were sitting with a different kind of weight, the weight of a choice. She had written those words in private. That much was undeniable. There had been no audience in her mind when she put pen to paper, no readership, no public, no legacy to manage. She had written the way people write when they believe no one else will ever see it, and that quality of absolute honesty was exactly what made the message so precious. It was also exactly what made the decision so hard. She didn't write it for the world, one family member said. The words landed carefully, not as an argument, but as a feeling spoken aloud. And yet, and this was where the conversation became complicated, Lisa Marie herself had never been only a private person. She had been born into a story that belonged, in some complicated way, to millions of people who had never met her. People who had grown up with her father's music, who had followed her life through the years, who had grieved her loss as genuinely as people can grieve for someone they have never known. Did those people deserve nothing? Did the truest version of her belong exclusively to the room in which it had been discovered? The family sat with that question for a long time. There was no clean answer. There rarely is when love is involved. Each person present understood that whatever they decided would carry consequences, not legal ones, not practical ones, but emotional ones. To share the message was to give the world something it had never truly had: direct, unfiltered access to who she really was. To keep it private was to honor the intimacy with which it had been written. Both choices were acts of love. Both choices came with a cost. What ultimately moved the conversation forward was not logic, but something simpler: the memory of her. They thought about what she would have wanted, not what she would have said in a public setting, carefully managed and aware of its audience, but what the version of her who had written those pages would have chosen. The woman who had always, in her quieter moments, wanted to be understood, who had spent years navigating the gap between who she was and who people assumed her to be, who had written, with such deliberate care, words that were honest and human, and full of a love that had nowhere to hide. She would have wanted to be known, not dissected, not sensationalized, not turned into a headline or a moment of entertainment for people who had long since reduced her to a single story, but known genuinely, warmly, as a person deserves to be known. And so, the family made their decision, not to expose, but to share, not to perform grief publicly, but to offer something true. They would let her speak. What happened next was quiet and gradual and profound. As pieces of the message, carefully chosen, thoughtfully offered, began reaching beyond the walls of the room where it had first been read, something shifted in the way people understood Lisa Marie Presley. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that real understanding usually moves, slowly, and then with sudden depth. People who had spent years forming opinions about her based on photographs and tabloid narratives and the impossible standard of being Elvis's child found themselves encountering something they had not expected. A woman, simply and completely a woman, with fears and hopes and private joys and a love for the people in her life that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of being human. Could a few carefully written pages reveal more about Lisa Marie than decades of public attention ever could? The answer, it turned out, was yes. Easily and entirely yes. Because public attention had always been looking for the story it already believed. It had been looking for the tragedy, the drama, the weight of the Presley name pressing down on everything she touched. And those things had been real. She had never denied that her life contained difficulty, that loss had visited her early and often, that the world she had been born into was not a gentle one. But they were not the whole of her. They were not even the most important part. The most important part was the love. That was what the message kept returning to, in different words and from different angles, with the persistence of something the writer needed to be absolutely certain was heard. She loved her family, not as an abstraction, not as a concept, but in the specific, detailed, irreplaceable way that only comes from truly knowing people. She loved the memories they had made together, the ordinary ones more than the grand ones. She loved who she had been in the company of the people who had known her best, and she wanted them, needed them, to hold that love carefully after she was gone, not as a burden, but as something alive, something that could still do work in the world even after she could no longer be present to tend it herself. The family felt her in those words in a way they had not felt her since she left. That was perhaps the greatest surprise of everything the message had brought with it. Grief has a way of making the person you have lost feel increasingly abstract. Their voice fades. The particular quality of their presence becomes harder to hold on to, and what remains is more like an impression than a person. But her words reversed that process. Reading them, sitting with them, carrying them forward, it brought her back. Not as she had been at the end, not as the public figure the world had cataloged and commented upon, but as herself. Warm and real, and exactly as she had always been in the moments that mattered most. Her children would grow up with those words. Her mother would return to them on the hard days, the ones when the absence felt sharpest. The people who had loved her would find, in what she had left behind, something they had not known they still needed: her voice, telling them one more time what they had meant to her. That was the gift, Not the mystery of the discovery, not the significance of the message as a document, but the simple and shattering fact of it, that she had sat alone and found a way to reach forward in time and touch the people she loved. She had always given more than she received, and even after everything, even now, she was still giving.